A bruised little girl stopped a royal guard in a park's alley and whispered to him that she had to make it to court today. He didn't ask why. He just picked her up and started walking. Past commuters, past stairs, past every barrier meant to stop him. And when they reached the courtroom and the judge asked who had brought her, the answer wasn't nearly as important as what she said on the stand, because in less than 7 minutes, the judge ordered officers detained, the bailiffs locked the doors, and half the room stood frozen, unsure what had just been uncovered. Before we show you how it happened, hit that subscribe button and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The morning shift at Horse Guards had been routine. 4 hours of standing motionless while tourists snapped photos and traffic rumbled past on Whitehall. Lance Corporal Rhys Everly had done this rotation hundreds of times over his 6 years with the Household Division, long enough to read the rhythm of London mornings like sheet music. The early commuters rushing past with coffee and newspapers, dodging puddles from the night's rain. The first tour groups clustering around the gates, guides already launching into their rehearsed speeches about ceremony and tradition. The steady clip-clop of the mounted guards changing positions, their horses' breath visible in the cool morning air. But this Tuesday felt different somehow, though Rhys couldn't put his finger on why as he walked the back streets toward Westminster after his shift ended. Maybe it was the way the October rain had stopped so suddenly around dawn, leaving the pavement gleaming under streetlights that hadn't yet switched off. Maybe it was the unusual quiet in the air, like the city was holding its breath before something significant happened. Or maybe it was just the kind of restless energy that came after standing perfectly still for 4 hours, his body craving movement and purpose beyond ceremonial duty. Rhys had learned to trust these instincts during his time in Afghanistan. That subtle shift in atmosphere that meant something was about to change, usually not for the better. His mates from the regiment used to joke that he had a sixth sense for trouble, but it wasn't mystical. It was just paying attention to details that most people ignored. At 28, Rhys had the kind of military bearing that made civilians unconsciously straighten their shoulders when he passed. 6 feet of disciplined muscle, wrapped in the ceremonial red tunic and bearskin that marked him as one of the Queen's Guard. But underneath the polished brass buttons and pristine white gloves lived reflexes honed by 2 tours in Afghanistan before he'd transferred to ceremonial duties. He noticed things, heard things, felt things that others missed. That's why he stopped when he heard the sound. A soft whimper, barely audible over the distant hum of morning traffic. It came from the narrow alley behind the Ministry of Justice building, where industrial waste bins created deep shadows between the loading docks. Rhys paused, tilted his head, listened. There it was again, definitely human, definitely young, definitely trying not to be heard. He found her crouched behind the largest bin, knees pulled up to her chest, trying to make herself invisible in the shadow cast by the loading dock overhang. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, wearing what looked like hospital pajamas that were too big for her small frame, pale blue cotton with cartoon clouds that would have been cheerful under different circumstances. Her feet were bare and bleeding from running on concrete, leaving small dark spots on the wet pavement. Dark bruises covered her arms like fingerprints, the kind that came from being grabbed too hard by adult hands. There was dried blood in her blonde hair where something had struck her temple, and her left wrist hung at an angle that suggested a sprain or worse. When she saw him approaching in full ceremonial dress, the towering bearskin hat, the bright red tunic with its gleaming buttons, the ceremonial sword at his side, her eyes went wide with a fear so profound it made Rhys's chest tighten. "Easy," Rhys said quietly, automatically dropping into the calm, steady tone he'd perfected during village patrols in Helmand Province, when approaching frightened children who'd learned that uniformed men often brought danger. "I'm not going to hurt you, just want to make sure you're all right." The girl pressed herself further back against the brick wall, shaking her head frantically, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Please don't take me back. Please, I have to get to court. I promised I'd tell them what happened." Court? The word hit Reese like cold water. A child this young, this injured, desperate to reach a courthouse rather than running away from authority. Every instinct, honed by years of military service and dealing with civilian populations in crisis zones, told him this wasn't a runaway or a troubled kid acting out. This was someone fleeing genuine danger. Reese crouched down to her level, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling her further. His ceremonial sword clinked softly against the pavement as he settled into position. "What's your name, love?" "Elsa," she whispered, then immediately looked like she regretted saying it, glancing around as if someone might have heard. "Elsa, I'm Reese. I'm a soldier, not police. Why do you need to get to court?" Her lip trembled as she looked up at him, taking in the red tunic, the gleaming buttons, the ceremonial sword at his side. "Are you one of the Queen's guards? The ones who protect important people?" "Sometimes," Reese replied carefully, noting how she seemed to relax slightly at his gentle tone. Elsa's expression shifted, hope flickering behind the fear like a candle flame in wind. "Then maybe you could protect me too, just until I get to the courthouse. I'm supposed to testify today, but they tried to stop me this morning. They came to our flat before dawn and told my mum that if I went to court, bad things would happen to both of us." The cold knot in Reese's stomach tightened. He'd seen enough during his deployments to recognize the particular kind of terror that came from being threatened by people who were supposed to protect you. "Who came to your flat, Elsa?" "The police," she said, and her words hit him like a physical blow. "Detective Superintendent Yates. He's been to see me 3 times now. The first time he was nice. Said he just wanted to hear my side of the story. But then, when I told him what I saw," she shuddered, wrapping her thin arms around herself, "he got angry. Said little girls who make up stories about important men end up in places where no one ever finds them." Reese felt his jaw clench involuntarily. In Afghanistan, they'd called it green on blue, when the people you were supposed to be working with turned out to be the enemy. But this was worse. This was a child being terrorized by the very system meant to protect her. "What did you see, Elsa?" he asked gently. She was quiet for so long that Reese thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There's a man, Mr. Nolan. He's on the city council. He comes to visit Whitmore House, where I live. It's a care home," she added, seeing his questioning look, "for kids whose parents can't look after them anymore." She paused, swallowing hard. "But he doesn't just come for the official visits during the day. He comes at night too, and he takes girls down to the basement. My friend Sarah, when she came back up, she couldn't stop crying. She wouldn't tell anyone what happened, but I knew it was bad." Reese felt his training kick in, the same protective instincts that had kept his unit alive in hostile territory. This child was a witness to something serious enough that corrupt officers were willing to intimidate her into silence. She needed protection, and she needed it now. "The courthouse isn't far from here," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "Can you walk?" Elsa tried to stand and immediately winced, favouring her left ankle. "I think I twisted it jumping from the window." Without hesitation, Reese scooped her up in his arms, settling her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed into his grip with the desperate trust of someone who had run out of options. "Hold on tight," he said. "We're going to make sure you get heard." The walk to Westminster Magistrates' Court should have taken 15 minutes through the maze of government buildings and tourist attractions that made up central London. But word travelled fast when a Queen's Guard in full ceremonial dress was seen carrying an injured child through the streets. Reese could feel the weight of curious stares as they passed morning commuters heading to work, tour groups gathering outside Westminster Abbey, and the ever-present photographers who haunted the government district looking for unusual shots. A businessman in an expensive suit stopped mid-phone call to stare. Two women pushing prams whispered to each other as they passed. A group of American tourists lowered their cameras, apparently sensing that this wasn't the kind of ceremonial display they should be documenting. Rees kept his pace steady and purposeful, his military training allowing him to scan for potential threats while maintaining the illusion of calm routine. Elsa had stopped trembling, but she kept her face pressed against his chest, hiding from the attention they were drawing. Every few steps she would whisper directions, "Left at the next corner," or "It's the big building with the flags," her voice muffled by his thick wool tunic. As they turned onto Parliament Street, Rees noticed a dark sedan that had been following them for the past 3 blocks, staying just far enough back to avoid being obvious. The driver wore sunglasses despite the overcast morning, and his passenger kept checking his phone. When Rees deliberately slowed his pace to test them, the sedan slowed too. "Elsa," he said quietly, "are those men still looking for you?" She raised her head slightly to peer over his shoulder, then immediately ducked back down. "I think so. Detective Yates said he had people watching all the places I might go." Rees made a decision that went against every protocol he'd ever learned about staying in his lane and letting proper authorities handle civilian matters. But proper authorities were exactly the problem here. "Hold on tight," he told Elsa, then suddenly turned down a narrow side street that cut between 2 government buildings. The sedan tried to follow, but the street was barely wide enough for foot traffic. Rees could hear car doors slamming behind them as the occupants got out to pursue on foot, but by then he was already emerging onto Victoria Street, just 2 blocks from the courthouse entrance. Rees ignored them all, his focus entirely on getting Elsa safely inside, but the security guards at the entrance weren't making it easy. "Hold up there," the senior guard said, stepping directly into Rees's path. "You can't just walk into a courthouse carrying someone. What's this about?" "She's a scheduled witness," Rees replied calmly, adjusting his grip on Elsa as she clung to his uniform. "She needs medical attention and legal protection." The guard looked skeptical. "What's her name?" "Elsa Jensen," the girl whispered before Rees could respond. The second security officer frowned, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what looked like a daily schedule. His expression changed as he found what he was looking for. "Bloody hell," he muttered. "She's listed for Crown Court 2, witness testimony in Regina Vief Nolan. But she was supposed to arrive by police transport an hour ago." He looked up sharply. "Where are your escorts? Your social worker?" Elsa's grip tightened on Rees's jacket. "They didn't come. The policeman said the case was being postponed. But I know that's not true. I heard him on the phone saying they'd handled the witness problem." The implications hit both guards simultaneously. A witness who'd failed to appear for police transport, but had somehow made it to court on her own, injured and terrified. This wasn't a scheduling mix-up. This was witness intimidation. "Get them inside," the senior guard said grimly. "Court 2 immediately. And call ahead. Tell them the missing witness has arrived with a military escort." The interior of the courthouse hummed with the controlled chaos of British justice in motion. Barristers in wigs hurrying between courtrooms, clerks wheeling trolleys of case files, solicitors huddled in urgent conferences with their clients. But all conversations stopped as Rees carried Elsa through the main corridor, his ceremonial boots echoing off the marble floors. A court clerk approached them near the entrance to Court 2, clipboard in hand, and concern written across her face. "Elsa Jensen, we've been trying to reach you all morning. The judge delayed the start of proceedings when you didn't arrive." "She's here now," Rees said simply. The clerk's eyes took in Elsa's condition. The bruises, the bloodied feet, the way she clutched Rees's uniform like a lifeline. "My God, what happened to you, sweetheart?" But before Elsa could answer, the doors to Court 2 swung open and His Honour Judge Anthony Callaway emerged, his expression thunderous. At 63, Callaway had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom and having zero tolerance for games. When he saw the small crowd gathered around a royal guard holding an injured child, his jaw tightened visibly. "Miss Jensen, I presume?" he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the bench. Elsa nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of such official power. "And you are," Callaway asked, turning to Reese. "Lance Corporal Reese Everly, Household Division. I found her hiding behind the ministry building. She asked for help getting to court." Judge Callaway studied them both for a long moment, taking in the dried blood, the bruises, the obvious signs that something had gone very wrong with the official witness protection protocols. "Court clerk," he said, without taking his eyes off Elsa, "cancel all other proceedings in Court 2 for the remainder of the day. Clear the gallery except for essential personnel. And get me the court security officer immediately." He looked back at Reese. "Corporal, you're not officially authorized to be present during these proceedings, but given the circumstances, I'm invoking emergency witness protection protocols. You'll remain in the court until we determine exactly what happened here." Reese nodded once, sharp and military. "Yes, sir. And get the child medical attention, now." The next 30 minutes transformed Court 2 from a routine civil proceeding into something that felt like a military operation. Medical personnel arrived to treat Elsa's injuries while she gave her initial statement to the judge in chambers. Court security called in additional personnel to sweep the building for any unauthorized individuals who might be monitoring the proceedings. And most significantly, Judge Callaway placed an immediate call to the Royal Military Police, requesting their assistance with what appeared to be a case involving the corruption of civilian law enforcement. When they finally convened the official hearing, the atmosphere in Court 2 felt electric with tension. Elsa sat in the witness box wearing a child-sized court robe over her pajamas, her injured ankle wrapped in medical tape, a stuffed elephant provided by victim services, clutched in her lap. Despite everything she'd been through, her spine was straight and her chin was up. Reese stood at attention near the back of the courtroom, his ceremonial sword and bearskin making him look like something from another century, a reminder that some oaths of protection dated back hundreds of years and hadn't been forgotten. The defendant, City Councillor Marcus Nolan, sat at the defence table flanked by 2 expensive-looking solicitors in hand-tailored suits and a third man in an ill-fitting jacket who kept checking his phone with obvious nervousness. Nolan himself looked composed, even arrogant, the kind of politician who'd spent years perfecting the art of projecting confidence, even when everything was falling apart around him. He wore an expensive watch and cufflinks that caught the courtroom lights, symbols of the power and respectability he wielded like armour. The gallery was mostly empty, except for a court reporter, 2 victim advocates, and a handful of legal observers who'd gotten word that something significant was happening in Callaway's courtroom. The judge had ordered the proceedings sealed until further notice, but word had already begun to spread through London's legal community that a major corruption case was breaking. Judge Callaway leaned forward in his chair, his voice gentle but carrying the unmistakable authority of 3 decades on the bench. "Miss Jensen, I want you to know that you're safe here. No one can hurt you in this courtroom. I need you to tell us, in your own words, what you witnessed that led to today's proceedings." Elsa took a shaky breath, her eyes finding Reese in the gallery. He gave her the slightest nod of encouragement, the same kind he might offer to a young soldier about to go on their first patrol. "I was staying at Whitmore House," she began, her voice stronger than anyone expected. "It's a care home for children whose parents can't look after them anymore. My mum's in hospital. She has cancer, so I've been there for almost 6 months now." She paused, gathering courage. "Mr. Nolan comes there sometimes for official visits, to check on how the children are being treated. The staff always makes sure everything looks perfect when he comes during the day. Clean rooms, good food, all of us dressed nicely, and ready to answer questions about how happy we are." A murmur rippled through the sparse gallery. Even the court reporter had looked up from her stenotype machine. But he also comes at night, Elsa continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. Usually on Fridays, after Mrs. Brennan, she runs the home, has sent the day staff home. And when he comes at night, he goes down to the basement with some of the older girls. Nolan's lawyer immediately objected, but Judge Callaway silenced him with a look that could have frozen the Thames in July. "Let her finish," the judge said coldly. Elsa clutched her stuffed elephant tighter. "I followed them one night about 3 weeks ago because my friend Sarah went down there, and when she came back up, she was crying and wouldn't talk to anyone for days. She used to be really talkative and funny, but after that night she just stopped, like someone had turned off a light inside her." The courtroom was dead silent now. Even the ventilation system seemed to have stopped humming. "I hid behind the old boiler and watched through a crack in the door," Elsa whispered, but her voice carried clearly in the absolute quiet. "He hurt her. He hurt her really bad. And when it was over, he gave money to Mrs. Brennan, a whole envelope full of notes. She counted it right there while Sarah was still crying." "And when you tried to report what you'd seen," Judge Callaway prompted. "I told my social worker, Miss Peters. She said she'd look into it, but then Detective Superintendent Yates came to see me. He said that important men like Mr. Nolan don't do things like that, and if I kept telling lies, I'd be moved to a worse place where no one would ever want to adopt me." Elsa reached into her pyjama pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind children sometimes used for school projects. "But I wasn't lying. I recorded him saying it." The defense attorney was on his feet immediately, shouting objections about illegal recordings and inadmissible evidence, but Judge Callaway was already signalling to the court security officer. "Play it," he ordered. The recorder's tinny speaker filled the silent courtroom with a man's voice, cultured, authoritative, and absolutely chilling in its casual cruelty. "Listen carefully, little girl. Mr. Nolan is a respected member of this community who does important work helping children like you. If you continue spreading these fantasies, you'll find yourself in a place where no one will listen to you ever again. Do you understand me?" And then, faintly, Elsa's terrified voice. "Yes, sir." The recording clicked off. In the silence that followed, Judge Callaway's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Court security officer, place Mr. Nolan under immediate arrest. Contact the Metropolitan Police Anti-Corruption Unit and inform them we have evidence of witness intimidation by one of their senior officers. And get me the Home Office. We're going to need a full investigation of every care facility this man had access to." Nolan finally lost his composure, lurching to his feet with his face flushed red. "This is ridiculous! You can't take the word of some damaged care home brat over a respected public servant." The words hung in the air like a confession. Judge Callaway stood slowly, his robes rustling in the absolute silence of the courtroom. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of British justice. "Mr. Nolan, you have just demonstrated exactly why this child needed protection from men like you, and why soldiers like Corporal Everly still matter in this world." He turned to address the court security team. "Execute those arrest warrants immediately, and someone contact the BBC. This case is going to be very public indeed." As Nolan was led away in handcuffs, his expensive solicitors scrambling to keep up, Elsa looked back at Rhys with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear this time, but of relief so profound it seemed to shake her small frame. Rhys gave her the slightest nod, the same acknowledgement he might give to a fellow soldier who'd shown courage under fire. Because that's exactly what she'd done. The courthouse steps were crowded with media by the time the proceedings concluded. News of a corruption scandal involving a city councillor, a senior police detective and multiple care homes had spread through London's press corps like wildfire. Camera crews jostled for position while reporters shouted questions at anyone who emerged from the building. But when the doors opened to reveal a royal guard in full ceremonial dress walking beside a small girl wrapped in his military cape, the crowd fell unusually quiet. There was something about the scene that demanded respect rather than sensationalism. The contrast between Reese's towering, uniformed presence and Elsa's small form. The protective way he kept himself between her and the cameras. The dignity with which they both carried themselves despite everything they'd been through. A social worker from the Emergency Protection Unit walked on Elsa's other side, but it was clear to everyone watching that the child's trust belonged entirely to the soldier who'd carried her to safety. At the bottom of the steps, a government car waited to take Elsa to a secure placement facility where she could recover while investigators built their case. As they reached the vehicle, she stopped and turned to face Reese. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the distant traffic. Reese crouched down to her level one final time, his ceremonial sword clanking softly against the pavement. "You don't need me anymore, love. You found your voice today. You used it. That's the bravest thing a soldier can do." Elsa nodded solemnly, then surprised him by wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "Thank you for not leaving me behind." "Never would have," Reese replied quietly. "That's not what we do." As the car pulled away, taking Elsa toward whatever came next in her journey toward healing, Reese remained standing on the courthouse steps. A few reporters tried to approach him with questions, but his bearing made it clear that interviews weren't welcome. He'd done what needed doing, the rest was for others to handle. A colleague from the Household Division appeared at his elbow, Sergeant Major Davies, who'd come to collect him and deal with any administrative fallout from the day's events. "Bit of excitement for a Tuesday morning," Davies observed dryly. Reese adjusted his tunic and settled his bearskin hat more firmly on his head. "Just walking someone home, Sarge." Davies smiled slightly. "Long walk from Horse Guards to the courthouse." "Sometimes they are," Reese replied. As they walked back toward Wellington Barracks through the London streets, Reese thought about the oath he'd taken when he joined the Household Division. To serve the Crown, protect the realm, uphold justice. Most days that meant standing motionless for hours while tourists took pictures, but occasionally, just occasionally, it meant something more. It meant carrying a frightened child to safety when no one else would. It meant standing witness to truth when powerful people tried to silence it. It meant remembering that the uniform wasn't just for show. It was a promise that some people would never walk away from those who needed protection. 3 weeks later, Detective Superintendent Yates was arrested at his home in Surrey, charged with conspiracy to pervert justice and child endangerment. The investigation into the care home network expanded to include facilities across southern England, ultimately leading to 17 arrests and the closure of 4 institutions. Elsa Jensen was placed with a foster family who specialised in helping traumatised children heal, and initial reports suggested she was slowly beginning to smile again. Reese never sought recognition for his role in breaking the case open. When journalists called requesting interviews, he referred them to the MOD press office, who issued a brief statement about the Household Division's commitment to serving all members of the public when duty called. The story that emerged in the newspapers focused on Elsa's courage and the justice system's response to corruption, with only passing mention of the soldier who'd carried her to court. That was exactly how Reese preferred it. Because the best heroes he'd learned long ago were the ones who showed up when nobody was watching, did what needed doing, and then went quietly back to their posts, ready for the next person who might need walking home. In a world where power often protects itself at the expense of the innocent, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to pick up a frightened child and carry her toward the light. Would you have carried her to court? Or would you have called someone else to handle it, someone with official authority and proper procedures? And when a child is too scared to trust the police, who do they turn to? Who becomes their protector when the system fails them? If this story moved you, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because courage comes in all forms, and we're here to share every story that proves ordinary people can do extraordinary things when it matters most. Share this with someone who believes that real heroes don't need permission to do the right thing. They just need the courage to step forward when everyone else steps back. Our next story is already waiting for you on screen. Click it now, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another moment that proves why character matters more than protocol. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important walk you'll ever take is the one that carries someone else to safety.